Today we have the even more alliterative second book of Samuel summary, and I have a feeling this video is going to be quite short because I'm struggling to come up with anything deeply profound to take from this second book. I sort of missed the early books where each book seemed to add something quite solid and profound, and then you got to Deuteronomy and it all went, oh no, that's broken the rhythm. First book of Samuel was a bit sort of, okay. Second book of Samuel kind of similar. I think the problem is that if it was historically accurate, then it would be interesting as a historical thing. But despite the fact a lot happens, it is all a bit bitty and it's difficult to draw any sort of massive conclusions from it. The obvious explanation for that, of course, is that just I've completely missed the point. So if anyone understands what that point might be, I would love to hear about it, because otherwise I'm having to sort of move on through this one fairly quickly as just a little bit of narrative. It's a little bit odd that this book is, I believe, ascribed to being written by Samuel, but Samuel's dead before the book of 2 Samuel even starts. There's a lot of S's going on in this today, isn't there? I checked that just before I started this, just to make sure, and the internet suggests that actually maybe Nathan took over, the prophet guy, but I've no idea if there's any particularly historical basis to that, and I don't think I particularly care either. I don't think it really matters, so we're just going to park that and move on. This story, though, is roughly the rise of David once he's in the role of king. And then we throw in a couple of civil wars, some weird family stuff, some wife stealing for good measure, obviously. And then that sort of ties into the idea that David is this difficult balance of, on the one hand, potentially profoundly righteous, depending on how you interpret some of the things he does. But on the other hand, one of the worst people ever. I mean, he steals a guy's wife and then deliberately gets that guy killed in battle. And you just think, how bad of a human being do you need to be doing that? It's just, it's beyond Bond villain if you try and apply that to real life. So I don't really know. And it's odd that David is hailed as this great king, but he's done these things and it's very strange. We do, however, though, have three big sort of theological points, I suppose, for want of a better word, that come out of this, which I think probably form the backbone of what I will take forward from the book of 2 Samuel. The first one is God taking away David's sin, and this, if you recall, is for the sin that we're not even sure what he did, and then God kills David's son instead. So it's like God has taken away your sin, so you're sort of forgiven, but then your son's killed, so you're clearly still punished. And it's almost like, I wonder, is it that David's so key to what's going forward in terms of God's plan, as it were, that he's done something wrong? God would perhaps ordinarily have killed him, but can't kill him because he needs him to do something, so kills his son instead? I don't know. I mean, it's some challenging stuff, isn't it? Both in terms of how that works and God killing a child. Don't know. I think we'll just have to put that out there as something we need to try and figure out as we go. The second point is we have this lady who doesn't have a name, but is incredibly wise and just turns up and announces that God has methods for someone who has been banished, no longer being banished from God. And I've no idea where she got this idea from, because it's not said that she's a prophet or anything. So she's got this idea, which seems deeply profound. And I guess you have to ask the question, is that even true? I mean, she may have just made that up, mightn't she? So... but it does seem to echo with the book of Judges in the sense that the Israelites keep being bad for decades and then God tries to give them another chance and they blow that and then he gives them another chance and they blow that and he gives them another chance. That does seem to tie into the idea that God is trying to save people regardless of how terrible they're being, I think. And then the final point is we have this enormous potential prophecy where Nathan sounds like he's predicting the arrival of Jesus in 1,000 years' time, i.e. the Son of God. But it's really irritating because it has that element to it where it says that when he does wrong, he's going to be punished by men. But my understanding is that Jesus is supposed to have done no wrong. So that you've got this almost massive prediction, but it's got this potentially massive flaw in it as well, because that wouldn't be right, that part. So I don't know. Maybe that's a translation issue when he does wrong or when he takes on the wrong of... I don't know. It's, yeah, it's a tricky one. I think that probably gives the book of 2 Samuel its character. Actually, it's got those 3 massive points, none of which I really know what to do with. So I think I'm going to have to summarise it as the deeply confusing theological one, I suppose. Hopefully, though, we will get some context from later books that will hopefully make Samuel make sense. Then perhaps we need to come back and revisit it. Since we're doing 5 for time, because I can't think of anything clever to say, we'll just do a quick recap on the previous books that we've done. I think this is number 10 now. I'm going to try this again without stopping. Here we go. So we have the book of Genesis, which, as far as I can see, seems to suggest that consciousness and free will necessarily mean that life is kind of going to suck a little bit. We have the book of Exodus, which idea seems to me that God is the boss, basically be excellent to each other. We're going to have Leviticus, which is the really boring one, but just seems to sort of tell you how you're supposed to manage a sinful nature and look after yourself in that respect. You've got Numbers, which is about the consequences of what happens if you don't do as we're told. Deuteronomy being the one that breaks the link in terms of everything having a nice sort of set kind of message, and then in Deuteronomy just rehashes some of the previous bits, but usefully so. We've got Joshua, which is the one with all the sort of genocide and that sort of difficult thing, but seems to bring about the question of, it's a very big difference between God telling someone to go and do something and someone just deciding to go and do something, especially if it's genocide. Not that it actually necessarily sounds like a lot of genocide, just dodgy language, but that's my sort of idea there. We have the book of Ruth, or do we have the book of Judges? Is it Judges then Ruth, or Ruth then Judges? I think it's Judges, isn't it? Basically the idea, as I said earlier, about the Israelites constantly sinning and God keep giving them another chance. Then I guess we have Ruth, which is a weird one, but does seem to at least establish that it looked to this point like if you weren't an Israelite, God just disliked you automatically. But given Ruth wasn't an Israelite, and a woman obviously actually doing something other than just sort of having babies, it seems to establish that it's not like that. You don't have to be an Israelite for God to care about you. You may have seen the cut there. I did admittedly just cheat, so I wasn't sure where I got to. But first book of Samuel being confusing story part 1, which just raises a lot of really difficult questions, not least being the idea that either God chose Saul very badly or God made Saul bad, in which case either of those problematic. We have to figure those out as we go. And then the book of 2 Samuel being the deeply confusing theological one with tricky questions. The next book is the book of 1 Kings, so it seems that we're continuing the theme of kingliness. And fingers crossed, something in here will help us clarify what we've just been reading in 1 and 2 Samuel.